Good afternoon, good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome back to Deep Thoughts. Today should be interesting, only because I got to screw this mic on. Today we're going to talk about the deep state. Now, I made an episode in Season 2 called Them, which is essentially the same group of people. But there's an interesting focus when you call them the deep state. And it's really those two words, deep and state. The idea is that they are embedded and that they are out of your sight. They hide in the shadows. But the word state, I think, is fantastic because it also tells you where they live within your life. They're hidden inside of your political organizations, but they are hidden inside of all your organizations. Now, there's a lot of arguments about whether or not it's even physically possible for a group of families to run the world. I think it is absurdly obvious that a few families run the world, and I don't see why anyone has any problem understanding how that's possible. And it goes something like this. This might be a little bit of plagiarism from my previous episode, but it's time to reanalyze. You know, when you go down your neighborhood and you walk down the street and you look at a house to the left, house to the right, let's say 50 years ago especially, you'd say, who owns that house? Oh, that's Bob Crane's house. Oh, okay. Who owns this house? Oh, it's John Rogers' house. Okay, that's great. And you just kept walking down the house, and there was always a family that owned a home. And really, when you look at who owned the home, the buck stopped with the guy that walked out with the trash in his hand. Pretty damn simple model of the world. And unfortunately, that's changed, right? There's a lot of rental properties now, right? They kind of go up the chain of command. Now it's like people come to your house, and they're trying to sell you, aluminum siding, and you have to say, well, I don't own the house, I rent the house. Well, now let's change the focus over to banking in general and banks in general. Walk up to your nearest Wells Fargo and say, who owns this bank? And if they name someone or name another institution is what they'll do, then you ask, okay, does that bank have an owner? Oh, well, yeah, it's this other holding company in England. Okay, well, who owns that holding company? Oh, well, it's actually owned by 4 or 5 families. Oh, well, what are those families? Well, we can't tell you. Boom, you found the deep state. You won't have found the functional model necessarily as much as the actual physical owners. And that is how you find the ruling class of this world. You continually ask, who owns that? Who owns that? Or you could change own for controls. Who controls that? Who controls this? So when someone comes against you and says, oh my God, you and your conspiracy theories, you think someone runs the whole world. Yeah, it's probably not one guy behind a curtain at the end of a yellow brick road. It is probably a consortium of families, probably not that many, with several extremely institutionalized bodies that they have created around them that educate individuals into compartments that handle their agendas. No one is to know the whole game except for a very, very few at the top. And that is how the world is run. So, deep state is a term that I've only seen for less than a year. It's probably been around for a long time, but I haven't heard it spoken. One of the greatest observations I've ever heard of, and I've mentioned it before on the show, is David Icke doing his presentations in Wembley Stadium talking about this exact thing. And one of the things that he was able to identify, or someone told him, was that when you have a dozen first world countries all instantiating an agenda at the exact same time without having a summit, without having some sort of meeting, series of phone calls, it's a real eye-opener that they are communicating and working together and being led by a single hand. For instance, this obsession with global warming, which again they call climate change because global warming doesn't exist. Right? With climate change, they're able to take credit for things getting extremely cold and things getting extremely hot. Whatever happens, we as human beings, I guess, expect the entire world to be 72 degrees and a slight wind every single day of our lives, Maybe it's 73, right? But no place on earth is like that. Hawaii's not like that, for Christ's sake. It gets really hot and muggy in the summertime in Hawaii, which is why everyone goes there in the wintertime. But now we want to bitch and moan and complain constantly. And so what they've done is they said, oh my God, we're going to take this little wrinkle in the kind of string of life where everyone wants to complain about the weather, and we're going to give them a gigantic agenda which will then strangle their ability to multiply and afford life. What's cool right now is that the deep state is in huge trouble and they don't know it. And that's what's awesome. You see, the deep state comes with a level of arrogance and hubris and history and tradition. They are the modern day Rome, but they are covert and secret. They have been in control for probably about 350 years, although they will usurp previous centuries that were built on different infrastructures, and they will simply say, look, no, we've been in charge for the entire time, 10,000 years, 60,000 years, whatever. Unless they're aliens that aren't humanoid, that's not true. And again, they don't get shit right. I'm not sure what the deep state is getting correct anymore, right? Their false flag massacres, their botched elections. Or even if we don't get the most amazing candidate in there, we at least get a candidate they didn't want in there, and that's fucking a victory all to itself. And of course, just, it could be that one of us who means well gets elected against all odds, and then they infiltrate us. They could infiltrate us by coming at us and threatening us if they think that's going to work. And again, they're going to pull off whatever strategy that they think works. And the second strategy would be a far more complicated strategy, which is to misguide and misdirect and misinform the individual such that they realize that individual has, standards. Like a Donald Trump has a lot of standards that people recognize and care about. And obviously he has different standards in other areas that people disagree with. But let's just say he meant to be the greatest president we've had in a long time. Not for his own ego, but just to rebuild America. But they take every single vector of his thought and say, well, he really wants to do this. Okay, so what we got to do is we have to trick him into it. So what they would do is they take his character and they would find out what he really wants to do that's good, and they'd misdirect and misguide him in every direction. They might get all of his advisors completely confused and maybe even put in a few shills. And so when he thinks he's hired an A player who's going to do, the American citizens the benefit, they actually are misguided, or they are paid off shills, lobbyists, or whatever, and they're in there doing the exact opposite. Because he's got to have to, at some point, delegate and trust. All shit can break loose, right? That's as close as I'm getting to that guy in this episode. But how big is the deep state? Well, there are several layers of deep state. There are layers of deep state that are very, very acutely aware of all that goes on. They are the ones that actually write the checks and get, dots connected and get people to actually take action. And then you have ebbing away from the center core of them, you get the people that are acting on behalf of them with no knowledge that that's what they're doing. And they're exploited for their own greed. And that's the truth. By saturating the world with at least 50 years of conspicuous consumption and materialism, and this notion that you can be rich, man, that is enough to get a lot of people to do whatever the hell you want them to do, and they have no idea that you exist. Right? I used to have a saying of my friends back in the day, way before I woke up. I said, you can get any man in the world to do whatever you want for $5,000. And they said, why is that? And I said, because you can pay a scumbag $5,000 to kill anybody in the world. Probably a lot less. You have to hook all those logistics up. But just think about how terrifying that is. And now you take people who have quadrillions of dollars. There's no limit. There's no limit to what they can get done. There's no limit to them buying something. Whatever man can conceive of and construct, these individuals could pay for the labor, the food, the shelter, and all the goods, the technological research, implementation, and they can get it built. You want a 747 times 4? They'll get it done if it's possible. So what are some of the rings outside of the core? The core is made up, if we just think of circles here, is made of the actual bloodline, the blue blood that makes up the core. They are at different levels inside the core. It has not been proven who is at the top of the little tiny pyramid stone, the parameridian stone that goes on top of this pyramid. Someone is at the tippy top, and there are folks at the bottom, although they are infinitely powerful in any sector of that stone. Out from them, you have your politicians. A ring of politicians. Politicians are obviously the heads of state in each individual country around the world. To take it down even further, in a balkanized country like America, where we have 50 states, we have politicians within all states. Within a particular state, you have politicians that run the cities, the mayors. In a small town, a mayor doesn't do much more than cut ribbon, but in a big city like Los Angeles, the mayor kicks some ass. Now, technically speaking, if we go back up to the federal level, the next layer away from that is the military. The military, which we are raised to believe is subservient to the politicians, is actually a much more hardened artery towards the center capstone than people would like to believe. And the reason why is that we have term limits for some politicians at least, but there are no term limits for military personnel. They can stay until they drop dead. Sure, you can retire. There's a bunch of times you can retire in the military, but usually you take about 20 years to get there, to earn your retirement. Now, we're going to come back to military in 1 second. But the next layer down are the police, law enforcement. Well, if we go back down to our political model and go all the way down to the mayor and the chief of police for whatever town that you're talking about, the sheriff, whatever, obviously that, the mayor is going to determine sort of and again, he's only one vote of several, but he's who you've elected, and he has a much easier, or she has a much easier job of convincing you of something because they are your candidate if you voted for them. But between the mayor and the local politicians in your little town or your big city and the police, they set the tone for the overall cultural impact of military and government on the people. Right? The laws being enforced determine this. And I'll give you an example. I've driven all over the United States of America several times. And I used to make a drive between New England and Kansas. There were states that you did not speed in. Ohio was one of those states. My father got a ticket, I think, going 1 or 2 miles over the speed limit in Ohio. And the reason why he wrote the ticket is he knows that if my dad went to court, he'd win, but my dad wants to go home in a different state, so my dad's not going to sit around for the court date. So it was a sham. It was a scam. And this is back in the early 80s. So the things that may have changed. But when I moved from Kansas to Colorado, to California, I remember coming down the 101 grade towards Ventura County. I'm going into Ventura County, and I'm going 70 miles an hour, which was 15 miles an hour over the speed limit. I'm 18 years old in my 1976 Dodge Charger Special Edition, eggshell white. And I look over, and there's a highway patrolman driving right next to me, not giving two fucks if I exist. And I'm looking, I'm going, holy shit. And of course, I panic a little bit in my heart. I'm like, oh my God, back when you're 18, getting a ticket's huge. I got my first ticket in my life in California. But he didn't care that I was driving 70 because he understood the bigger picture. This is a 4-lane highway and no one's on the highway. It's late at night. He didn't care. And so that set the culture for what California was like. There's a lot of soldiers in China. A lot of men go in the military. North Korea, I think everyone's a soldier, right? Okay. It doesn't happen that way in America, right? It doesn't happen that way in Europe, although you do have to serve in the military in Germany, although they're not allowed to have a standing army. I need you to see that picture in your brain so that you understand when these units and these bodies are connected. And no one at all questions whether or not they're connected, right? Everybody knows that stuff's connected. That's the way it's supposed to be. Law enforcement follows the laws that are passed by the local politicians as per votes and petitions and bills to the people. And then on the federal level, we redo the whole thing, except for instead of having a local police, we have something called the military. It's supposed to serve and protect, right? Enforce peace. And it all ends at the commander-in-chief, a chancellor, or a prime minister, right? Those are the three words we use around the world. But for some reason, we can't seem to imagine that there are more bodies to this game. Now, there's two huge groups that I haven't mentioned yet. And they are very, very important when it comes to how the ruling class / the deep state does what it does. Have you ever heard of companies that, like Goldman Sachs, some of the highest paid CEOs in the entire planet? They will do extremely nefarious things. They will be at the absolute heart of the savings and loan scandals, of the subprime loan scandals. I mean, they are at the heart of it all. But no one goes to jail, and they get the biggest bonuses anyone's ever heard of ever. Hundreds of millions of dollars in 1 year. Just to one motherfucker, man. It's unbelievable. Well, here's what's going on there. The deep state controls the creation of all money in countries that use fiat currency, meaning if we're suckers and we sign the 16th Amendment, which has to be abolished, people, if you want Trump to do anything or any president coming up, every president should get rid of the 16th Amendment like on the first day and sign a brand new zero amendment that says compound interest is illegal. But for everyone who gets their money from them, the money is created from nothing, backed by nothing. So it's really monopoly money. It really is just as valuable as monopoly money until it's put through a petrodollar system. It gets launched into existence through the purchase of a barrel of oil in many cases. But without all the complications, it ends up in the control of these investment banking houses like Goldman Sachs. And they determine where the money ends up. The money is given to the second tier, the second missing member of our puzzle here, which are corporations. You ever wonder how evil corporations never run out of money? Ever? They could actually be in the hole begging for money from the United States of America, and where they should just go the fuck out of business, just like when the government wasn't going to forgive your debt and your little hardware store went out of business or your little music store went out of business. No one came to your fucking rescue, right? But you'll see these corporations that poison people, that kill people. You know, Bayer Aspirin released a bunch of medicine to South Africa with AIDS in it. Pfft, it's no problem. It's no problem. Not even a prosecution there. Nothing. Oh, I guess they deserved it, right? Just look it up. Bayer Aspirin, AIDS. You'll see the story. It's very old by now. But now we've added the money system is under their control. In fact, the 16th Amendment is nothing but an absolute blueprint of how we are controlled by the deep state. Do you realize that 80% of the members of the Federal Reserve Bank, a private for-profit bank, right? They're not federal. They're about as Federal Express, right? As they always say. 80% of the members have their identity shrouded by law. You can't know because it's a private corporation and you're not allowed to ask who the members are. By the way, different states have different policies on that. Apparently, if you make the corporation in the United States in the state of California, they will release the members of the corporation and the owners of the corporation. If you incorporate in Delaware, you can conceal who you are. So a lot of people think that Delaware corporations are a tax evasion mechanism. It's really sort of obfuscation. It's protectionism against who you are as a person. But now I want you to think about those layers that I mentioned, right? We've got your politicians, your military, your local politicians, your law enforcement. Back up to the top, you have your investment banking houses and all the corporations in the world who have especially who've gone IPO. But some of them haven't, and they still are fairly formidable, right? How much of the world could you control if you controlled all of that? And what I need you to understand is this is not just an American formula. This is a formula that is spread all over the world. I would be actually shocked if there wasn't a country on Earth that hasn't been infiltrated by them in some way, shape, or form. Now in America, we have it a little bit better in terms of how our shilly politicians are elected. You have kind of normal citizens who then, buy into pop culture and get into all this crap, and they need to be famous, like Sally Fields, and they become politicians. Some of them get there organically at really low levels and no one pays any attention. But anybody who's a head of state in any major city, any major county, and any major state, they are most definitely contacted. Whether or not they realize it or not, they are contacted by individuals that try to figure out what they stand for. And of course, during an election process, what you stand for is usually very well telegraphed to the people. But you'll start getting surrounded by campaign managers, finance managers, and they trickle everything up. And because they control money, they control money at the investment banking level, they control it at a corporate level, and you have to understand that corporations also sort of give birth to these investors of the world, right? Someone sells their corporation like an Elon Musk and they come out with $1 billion, like a Mark Rubin come out with $1 billion, technically on paper, right? And so those individuals will then have a tremendous amount of power financially. If they were to start a bank with their money and put $1 billion in, well, they could loan $100 billion out. And that's why it's really dangerous to let anyone go rogue in the world, and that's why they get surrounded very quickly. Mark Rubin was a huge problem for the Bush administration because he was one of the people who realized 9/11 was an inside job. In order to control him, they threatened him with insider trading, which he was not guilty of most likely. Then they put him in movies like, Sharknado to make him feel like a movie star. He's the goofiest looking fucker on planet Earth, right? Then they give him his Shark Tank show. He's always fucking related to sharks. I don't know what the deal is. And now he is supposedly so well informed about politics, he is now a spokesman on many news networks, fake news networks, right? They're giving him those accolades so he shuts the fuck up. And he loves the fame and he loves the money and he realizes, well, I'm only one guy. And there's no one else that really wants to do this at my level. So, what can I do? But sit on the sidelines. And quite frankly, maybe we would have to do the same thing. You never know. You never know. But let's look at the charter of each individual organization, because it's a big deal. Especially the doers. Your politicians aren't really the doers, except that they can create kind of super PACs with scumbags like Nancy Pelosi, whose parents were fucking politicians. She was raised to be a politician. She is as centrist as you can get. She'll do whatever will keep her famous. She doesn't give a shit if she's red or blue. She doesn't care. She's so disconnected with reality. Only Maxine Waters is probably more disconnected than Nancy Pelosi, right? But let's look at corporations. We know that corporations are the bodies that make our food, make our medicine. And so with those two regiments, they get to control the health of all human beings, the prosperity of all human beings, unless you get out of their food supply, right? They own the hospitals that bring you into this world. They own all the pharmaceutical companies that give you the sense that you're taking a medicine that will make you feel better. And it might make you feel better, but it may not be good for you at the same time. Corporations also control the education system. Even if you think, oh, well, no, that's not true. There's state colleges. Okay, where do they buy their books, hotshot? Are there state publishing agencies? Nah. At best, you've got self-published books out of each university. Stanford Press, Oklahoma University Press, that kind of stuff. But those books are seldom part of the mandatory curriculum of any college education. You're getting your books from usually centralized European publishers. And those books have been heavily sanitized. The revisionistic history is taught with no option of being anything other than factual history. And this is K through 12, people. This is college. This is your graduate, your postgraduate, and your doctoral degree. They control it all. Everything that you learn, they control. Then there's the Marshall McLuhan area of corporatism, which is media. They control every single piece of media you watch, except things like YouTube. How awesome is that? We have one artery left for a while, okay? Remember, Obama gave away the entire control of the internet to ICANN, ICANN. If there's any reason to put that motherfucker in jail for the rest of his life, it's for doing that one thing. Surrendering our internet jurisdiction to some fucking blowhards in Europe. I don't know about you, but if I woke up today and America looked like Europe does today, I dare say the world would be a different place. I think this country would fucking revolt on a level you've never seen before. So what does the media do? Well, it controls the narrative of all things. If you're trying to build a perception of what's going on in the world, you have to get it from media if you don't get it from other alternate news sources. Fake news. Massacres. Fake fucking massacres that are so fake. It is unbelievable. Telling you that bombs went off with absolutely no proof. Showing you supposedly dead bodies, which just look like a bunch of crisis actors lying on the ground. Having done the drill for the exercise a month earlier on video. Where everyone's wearing, earmuffs. Just like at a shooting range. But the media hops on it. From RT in Russia to BBC to Al Jazeera to all the organizations in America and abroad, all jumping on it, making a fake moment real, instilling fear into everyone who isn't awake. I don't even know what it would be like to not be awake. You get that stupid question, well, how do you sleep at night knowing all these dark things or believing all this dark shit? And it's like, how the fuck do you fall asleep believing all this fucking horse shit? How do you do it? God damn, it's hard enough to fall asleep thinking that nobody actually died, but everyone's being duped into thinking everybody died. That's frustrating enough. You actually think a bunch of people died, little kids and shit. Unbelievable. We have television and Hollywood, the paradigms of fiction. Now, season 3, we're obviously beating this up quite a bit. I'm not sure what order this episode's going to come out in, but I've got one. It's on Hollywood themes. Well, the pop culture, your value systems, your immorality is all led by television and movies. And they're so goddamn subtle, it's unbelievable, right? Trying to make adultery okay, trying to make divorce a certainty, trying to make broken homes and teen pregnancies just a given. Being in debt and being unhappy and dying alone, all are basic themes in Hollywood. Being gay, it's a huge theme in Hollywood, right? I mean, it's almost to the point they're trying to make you feel guilty if you happen to just follow your genetic code. It's the truth. And how is it all controlled? How is it all controlled? I mean, this is, I think, where people miss out on the nervous system of the world. You know, when you vision the human body, you envision the nervous system. There used to be those, the World Encyclopedia used to have these beautiful transparencies, and you could pull off each layer of a human body, and it was just gorgeous how they layered, you know, the epidermis and then the veins and the arteries and your core organs, and there's 4 or 5 pages of organs, and you get down to the nervous system, which is this electrical network around your body, right? The nervous system of the world is money, fake money. Real money allows you to disengage from the control apparatus, which is what Putin is doing for his people, which is why the Russians are being demonized now more than ever, because Russia has completely pulled out of their system. He's paid off the debt to them, and he's refused to use their money. It's awesome. China's trying to do the same thing. Now, China is a big house of cards. It's a huge fake country of power. Well, China is, you know, if you had to climb, like, say, 5 flights of stairs to be in first world country, China is like barely turning the first set of 10 steps, and they're still on the first floor. The reason why they're being called this big gigantic economic power is that they take care of so much manufacturing with slave labor that the accolade of persecuting your people with $2.10 an hour, or excuse me, $2.10 a day, excuse me, right? That's the bare minimum they have to pay to keep out of the poverty level with their people, you know, when it comes to human rights around the world. Their accolade is to say, oh, now we're going to get you nearly first world status. That country is very primitive in most of its land. Good people. You know, they have different standards than we do, so when you see them eating cats and dogs, it's really tough on the mind. When you see them drive willy-nilly all over the road, you know, they drive in the opposite direction on a major highway because it's available. They don't follow traffic lights. They walk across streets without looking both ways. They take shits in their streets, right down inside the drain in front of everybody. One of my good friends and engineers in my game company, he's born in America, but, you know, he visits China every once in a while to visit his relatives, and I was texting him one time when he was in China. I can't remember exactly where he was, and I said, how's it going over there? And he's like, well, I haven't seen anyone shit in the street today, so that's good. But every day he'd been there, he had seen this. I guess the babies go around with virtually no clothes on from the waist down because they're constantly passing their waist. And it's just a fucking weird country, right? But back to our subject. How is money controlling everything? Well, you might say, well, you know, we know that's the case, but what are you talking about? Well, let's say that you had 2 food organizations, 2 big food corporations. One is buying GMO Monsanto products, genetically modified food that's going to give you cancer and terminate your ability to have children. And the other one manages, for the same investment, to make organic food the way it all was in the 1970s and before. So one is obviously good for you and one isn't. There's no difference in the financial rewards of each corporation because there's been magic done on the organic side. But here comes a round of investment from an investment banking house. Now remember, the investment banking house is just an arm of these individuals in the deep state, the families that control the agendas. Well, their agenda right now is to depopulate the world. So they have a choice: create organically fed human beings that grow up to be tall, strong, and wise, or create malnutritioned, infertile, cancer-ridden human beings that die early. Where do you put the money? We all know what the answer is, right? They fund the one that's buying their products from another sister corporation that has been utterly invented to create depopulation, which is Monsanto. Monsanto is the enemy of mankind. It is not just a nefarious little company that, maybe makes bubble gum, makes all the kids' teeth fall out. No, they're involved in the extermination of mankind. That's what they do. And the organizations that would stop them have also been co-opted, such as the FDA, the EPA. Give them all blank checks, man, because this is an agenda that's supposed to continue. And again, we need to do something about world population, but it's not something that's a problem of, white Anglo-Saxon first world countries. We're intellectually reducing our world population through selfishness and greed, through technology that makes sure that we don't have to have 20 kids to, plow the fields, because now we can go down to the supermarket and buy our food whenever we're hungry. Go to a fast food place, whatever. But countries like China and India have no incentives to control their population. In fact, China is all upside down now, right? They have, 30 million males in China that have no partners because they've lopsided and made sure that all the little girls that were born were euthanized. India is trying to inspire their women to get hysterectomies by handing out cell phones and little rewards. Meanwhile, Putin, who watched the 90s reduce his population by 50 million. I mean, the number is really huge. He's paying now subsidies for people to have babies over there. Let's say that you're a state. Let's say that you are a state educational system. Let's go into education in general. Well, if you're part of the Ivy League schools, it's pretty damn simple. You bring in the only choices that they have to buy books. If you control all the publishing companies of the world, then you simply publish only what you want people to read. There are no alternative publishing companies that can gain the academic certification to be a accredited book. And so you can't get the truth out there. You couldn't if you tried. Those of you who believe in flat earth, imagine trying to rewrite physics and cosmology and every division of science that is addressed by your flat earth theory. Try to get those books introduced into a college as an optional choice of belief. You never will be able to do that until the world is completely re-engineered. This is why we've got work to do, I think expanding Earth should be taught as an option. I think that anyone who asserts that something happened when no one was there should be options, just in history in general. They teach you that Napoleon was short, but he wasn't. He was very average height for his time. And a subject came up the other day in my smoke lounge, which I was able to comment on, which I want to share with you guys. We were talking about bad food, and everybody was like, but humans are getting bigger, so obviously our food supply is actually pretty damn good right now. And I said, that's not the truth. In 1955, in order to be a law enforcement officer in the United States of America, you had to meet a 6-foot height minimum. Now that's no longer the case because we don't have 6-foot human beings popping out of every woman like you used to. My father and his brother are over 6 feet. I am not. My cousin isn't. All my friends, most of my friends aren't 6 feet. It's not just because our mothers are short. It's just a malnutrition thing. I was put in the hospital at 14 years old, I think it was 14, for malnutrition. I had gotten bronchial pneumonia, and I sat at home for several days. But what was happening was the food I was eating at home, which was right off the shelf. I mean, my dad was good about making sure we had vegetables and all this other kind of stuff. I mean, you had to eat a vegetable, and my dad was really good about that. So we ate the standard American food, but it ended up being so much processed food that I wasn't getting the nutrition that I needed. So when I got sick, I was sitting on probably the precipice of malnutrition. And when I got sick for 2 or 3 days, I slipped well below that. And when I hit the hospital, I stayed in there for a week. And, I actually believe that, I didn't grow much after that point because I was pretty tall for my age up to that point. Yeah, who knows? I kind of dig my height personally, but how do you get elected in this world? You get elected through money, participation in your campaign. This is why Donald Trump is such an anomaly in the system, spending, a fourth of what Hillary Clinton spent. The guy becomes president. Remember the night he became president? All the fake news organizations, including Fox, which is supposed to be a pro-Trump organization because they're the right-wing side of everything, every comment on air was how they were astonished that Trump won a state. How could this be? This could actually happen. Oh my God, this is shocking. Well, Christ, if it's your fucking team, why are you so surprised? Would you go to your kid's softball game or baseball game or whatever sport your kid's playing and be utterly shocked that your kid won? Well, you shouldn't. You should believe in your kid. I mean, yeah, deep down inside whether your kid has a good team or a bad team, but Christ, when they win, you don't like bawl and moan as your kid's making points in the score or points in the game, right? You're excited. You get more excited as your team starts to win. But the night of Donald Trump's election, every fake news organization, which is fucking all of them, except for perhaps InfoWars, was complaining and bitching and moaning, whining, because he wasn't supposed to win. Just always remember what the Rothschilds said. Give me the control of their money, and I care not who they vote for. And believe me, that is not some poetic epiphany of the Rothschilds. That is a mantra that has been held down or handed down for thousands of years. Get people strung out on a monetary system and control it. Control its supply. But now let's talk about, because a lot of this is really low-hanging fruit for a lot of you guys and gals that are very educated about this. You're probably bored to death. Sorry, it took me 50 minutes to get you there, but the glue is the most interesting part to me. And this is where you get what we call controllers. We have seen controllers all over many touch points. And they know that controllers are a big pain in the ass to create, and they're a liability once they are created. Woodrow Wilson is a great example of a gentleman that was, I believe, a history professor who became the president of the United States at a time when they needed to ratify this 16th Amendment. Taft, the first skull and bones president ever to be elected in the United States of America, with his little sidekick, Philander Knox, who was the attorney for the Rothschilds, the Vanderbilts, the J.P. Morgan, the Rockefellers, the Carnegies. I mean, he was a shill if there ever was one. That's what Fort Knox is actually named after. Philander is spelled with a PH, by the way, if you want to check him out on Wikipedia. Woodrow Wilson was always seen with a guy named Colonel Moon. And almost every single photograph besides the one where he's in his backyard in a freaking rocking chair with a big blanket over him going crazy in his backyard, saying that he thinks he just sold out his country. He was a good guy. He just was sort of a good guy. He was not that brilliant in the area of politics, and he was duped into selling out his country. By the time he died, he figured it out. He was completely and utterly controlled. He was approached by this individual to run for president. He said, I don't really have the chops to do it. And this individual said to him, don't worry, I'll take care of it. Just do what I say, when I say, and everything will be okay. Well, what man's ego could resist the temptation of becoming president and resist the romantic notion of serving your country, right? Not Woodrow Wilson. And so he was controlled. Adolf Hitler had a controller. He had his controller dragged out in the woods and killed eventually because he figured out what was going on. There have been a History Channel specials on the fact that Hitler was actually worshiping a psychic who was telling him where to be and what speeches to give. That's the cover story for his banker controller. But the dude woke up and said, I'm here to free Europe from the banking cartel that has been controlling this place. And he had him murdered. Thank God. Now, television and film was very interesting. At first, there was probably about half a century of organic television and movies. Things were made because they were entertaining and they were good and they were wholesome. It still happens to this day, but it's very, very rare that a script isn't altered to embed an agenda, to embed a theme. Right? Even was a Pacific Rim had to have a global warming bullshit arc stuffed into the script, and if you watch the film, it is the most disjointed sort of one of these things is not like the other pieces of dialogue in the entire film, and I guarantee you that was part of the approval agenda on the script to say, you know, we'll make your movie if you stick this bullshit in there. And then, of course, we have movies that are complete shills, which are pumping revisionistic history. But somewhere in there, between probably the 60s and the 50s and the 60s, you got a tremendous amount of co-opting and, sort of injections into these narratives to change the way that the world thought about things. And in the 70s, I've now discovered, 70s and the 80s both, infidelity and divorce were huge in the agendas. And what happened in the 70s and 80s? Well, divorce became a standard. You get upset about life, you book. And now we have all of us. It's a miracle to find one fucking kid in the world that has their parents still together. Their genetic parents still married to each other. What kid makes it to 20 having not seen virtually every version of porn on the internet? Just out of sheer curiosity. This is the world we live in. You can't get things greenlit in this world without money, corporations, agendas. And they control it. But what's interesting is that the deep state has done such a brilliant job revising the very mental patterns inside human minds that now it's on sort of an autopilot. I mean, there's got to be someone at the capstone really feeling brilliantly rewarded for having accomplished this. To the point now, they don't need to get in there and infect everything personally. People will write, global warming scripts because they're now stuck inside this movement to find purpose in love. There's this whole thing, to go back to the politician later for a second, there's this almost baffling idea that 18-year-olds can vote in America, but they can't drink alcohol. There doesn't seem to be any qualification to vote. You don't have to prove your prowess to vote. But how fucking ridiculous is that? You're going to vote for a politician? Okay, well, you need to show us that you understand what your options are. You want to post on Facebook about foreign policy? Well, let's first just find out what you know about foreign policy, about the history of the world. Let's find out how many revisionistic tits you suck on a daily basis to build your image of the world. If the deep state was in control, you wouldn't have any access to these privileges unless you bought off on the paradigms and the revisionistic ideas that they've tried to inject into pop culture. But in a real world, we would have real history rediscovered. I mean, think about it. If we were to redo this world and get rid of these blowhards and make what they do illegal, right? Compound interest is illegal. Fiat currencies are illegal. Fractional reserve banking is illegal. Then they lose all their power overnight. And I mean, in a flash of a pan, they would cease to be in power. Remember, there's paper money and there's real money, right? How can you sell a mansion, a Rothschild mansion, if it's worth $200 million? How do you sell it to somebody? Who the fuck's got that kind of money? Who wants it in the first place? Nobody. It'd just sit and it would rot. It would be an effigy to a dark time in our history. But we let people determine how the world is held together who have no knowledge of the mechanics of such things. And we've sold it as this inalienable right. When the age of voting was determined many hundreds of years ago, 18 was a good age, because at 18 people were informed as much as they could possibly be informed, and there wasn't a bunch of fake news organizations like the Hearst Corporation putting out yellow journalism. But as they figured out that they could manipulate the news and manipulate the opinions, it became very easy. And 18 became a weapon. Honestly, in today's man-child era, I'm not sure how old you would have to be informed. I'm not sure it has anything to do with your age. It would have to do with your consumption of information. But actually, I forgot to make my other point. Let me make this point. If we were to redo this world, right, we'd have archaeologists of history to go back and sort of take every claim of history and apply logic to it. I can guarantee you World War II would be completely re-engineered as to what occurred, why Hitler rose to power, why the Japanese attacked Pearl Harbor, and what happened as a result of those two catalyzing events. The whole thing would be jaw-droppingly different, and I'm telling you right now, a lot of people are waking up to that. I'll tell you the number one way that you can be deemed an evil person in the eyes of the people forever and ever and ever, especially if you become a world leader. And here's how it goes. You simply resist the banking cartel of the world, right? The big banks that are owned by those families. You resist their agendas on a military level. You resist their petrodollar, their fiat currency, their bad education, and you become an enemy. And they will come after you, and they will write fake news stories about what you've done. They'll write fake news stories about your children being monsters. I once saw I think it was a History Channel special. You know, History Channel has a lot of war shows, because that's obviously awesome. And they interviewed Dick Cheney about Saddam Hussein. And there was a weird, tiny segment in this thing where he admitted very bluntly that a lot of the press about Saddam Hussein was completely faked. And he admitted on camera, very nonchalantly, that this is what they had to do in order to get people to take out a tyrant. Now, I think the one thing that Saddam Hussein actually did with Monsanto poison sold to him by Donald Rumsfeld in the early 80s was he did gas the Kurds. I believe that did occur. There's obviously a horrific way to do anything in life, right? But all the stories about him boiling people in oil and watching his sons murdering people over and over and over again, murdering women, it sounded to me like in that particular interview with Dick Cheney, he admitted that a large portion of that was completely fabricated. You don't know which ones are which. Now, it's not inconceivable that a child of someone who's, basically an emperor on earth would have the privilege of doing whatever the hell they want. But it makes you go, Gaddafi. Gaddafi is blamed for the Lockerbie bombing of the plane, right? I have to say I was unaware of false flags when that occurred. But I remember seeing the photographs of the people that supposedly fell out of the plane. I think the way that the flight happened was that it was just taking off, so it wasn't that high in the air, and it blew up and then fell down. Now, obviously, a plane blew up and fell down, as far as I can discern. But there were bodies that were seemingly completely uninjured lying on the ground. I remember that. And now that I've seen the real remains of flights that were just taking off and crashed into neighborhoods, I think we had one in Orange County many, many years ago. Nobody's body is intact when you land. There are no arms, legs, and torsos and heads all connected together. It doesn't happen. If they do, they're burned up. But a lot of the pictures I saw from the Lockerbie thing looked suspicious to me. But Gaddafi wanted his sovereignty. He wanted his own money. He was going to be creating a dinar, an African dinar backed by gold, just before they went and killed him. You read the benefits of living in Libya just before he was murdered, and you would only hope to have those benefits in your country. You know, we're talking about thousands of dollars given to a woman who has a child with gigantic, 6 months of home maternal care, mandated by the state. And so you had a good country to breed good people, and the place has been in absolute hell ever since, right? The Bilderberg Group, which I've done an episode on, right? They're a headhunting agency that finds all the world leaders. And of course, they're working in unison with other organizations that if they find a leader that needs to be replaced, and it's really a truly elected leader, they will use people like the economic hitman to take them over, to bring uprisings, to find resistance pockets. And if there's no one who hates the leadership, and usually there always is a little pocket within every country, they'll bring them in from another country, arm them, tell them exactly how it works, give them support, give them incredible intel, until that leader is washed away. And that's how the world works. But in more modern societies, it's much easier, right? It's much easier. You just have an election and you fix it. You use electronic voting machines, which in large part are owned by various people in the intelligence agencies or in politics, right? Jeb Bush and a senator in Florida both own a part of a voting machine company that was used to give his buddy, who was about to lose by double digits, a double-digit win. And Bush was an incumbent, so he was supposed to win, but he won by a pretty good margin. One of their coders went to a town hall meeting on video and said, I was a coder in there and I programmed the thing to throw votes. But where's the national uprising? It's nowhere to be found because you have to use the fake news organizations to bring it to the forefront. Because they are controlled, it never makes it to the forefront. So when someone tells you that, you feel like they're lying. Because you have, not you personally, but the people out there that watch fake news, they buy it up. They eat it up. They believe it. So how do we defeat the deep state? Well, there's probably several phases to the process, but the number one phase is the original step that an alcoholic has to go through, which is to acknowledge that they're alcoholics. We have to acknowledge that the deep state exists, this covert group of bankers. And I'm not talking about the teller at your local, bank. I'm not talking about the president of your local bank. These people are just as asleep as anyone. Hell, even most of the employees of the Federal Reserve are completely fucking asleep. But we're talking about the people that you do not see, the people that if you looked up their name on Google, you barely find any search results because they've been, blacklisted out of the database. You could make a web page with someone's name on it and it'll never get indexed if they're on that list. Best case scenario, it's on like page 400. Out of 10 results on every single page in Google, they're on page 400. So you'll never find it. If you make a video on it, it never comes up in the search results of YouTube. You'd have to create a Reddit thread and direct everyone directly to your article. But then again, you're still talking about only a handful of people waking up. But we have to acknowledge that this exists. Like David Icke, we have to find formulas that make no sense when every single first world country launches an agenda without any, summit to talk about it on a global agenda. That's evidence that they're all acting together through some phantom force. The idea that we have boom and busts where every single country goes into financial ruin at the exact same time should cause any decent thinking economist to say that's impossible. And even if it were possible, whatever would make that possible should be dismantled and rebuilt, right? Remember when, you used to put together Christmas trees in the 70s and even the 80s, and one of the goddamn bulbs went out, the whole fucking strand went out, and then you got the little spare bulb, you get in the box, and you're taking every one of them out and holding them up to the light and seeing which one of the filaments are out, trying to find the one that's busted. And now they don't wire these lights in series anymore because people wouldn't buy the lights that do. Well, that's exactly, supposedly, the economic system of a first world country, a 21st century existence in this planet, that if one country has a problem, they all go down the tubes. Well, if that's the case, we need to rebuild all of our supply and demand chains. We need to have diverse fucking economies without euros, right? When you had individual currencies in Europe, if the Deutschmark had a problem, the franc could step in and help them out, vice versa. The United States dollar could go in and fix that. But when you're all tied together in one economy, yay, globalism, everyone goes down at the same time. The internet was literally designed to help the military endure nuclear attacks, such that Dallas, Texas could be bombed, but you could still get a message from Oklahoma City to Houston, because it would go around the wires that were being used in Dallas, which was the most efficient path. That's what the whole TCP/IP protocol is all about. Okay, so knowing that they exist is definitely the first step there. The second step is to get rid of their power. Part of it is to stop buying products from their corporations. Some of the greatest news that we have discovered in the last 2 or 3 years is that less soda, drinking soda, Coke and Pepsi and all those products are being purchased by people. McDonald's has had a hell of a time selling their shitty food. Remember, next time you go through McDonald's drive-thru, if you happen to still buy whatever it is you buy, look at the little sticker on the sliding glass door, especially if you're in California, that says, our products are made with cancer-causing birth defect ingredients according to the state of California. So you're warned now. Fake news is huge. This fake news thing is so much bigger than I think most people realize. By calling it fake news and getting rid of these organizations, especially Trump doing, the bulk of it here in America, he is disembodying the disinformation that keeps coming through the system. Now, your problem is where do you get information from if you don't get it from those organizations? Now, I can still find value in reading about what they do because I can read through the bullshit, right? When I look at all the cover stories on these latest massacres that are going on, you can try to find out what they're trying to make you believe, but you don't believe it. When you read an article about NASA discovering something, you know that that's just a bullshit PR stunt to try and justify $60 million a day to the organization. So you try to find out where their weaknesses are by reading the articles, because anytime they're pushing something, they're paying money to push it, and that is an area of weakness. They're trying to prop up these bad organizations. If an evil politician starts to campaign something as a positive, then you obviously know it's a negative, right? And remember, some of the campaign strategies of folks like the Clintons, their whole campaign strategy was to accuse the other person of what they've done. So when Bill Clinton's visits to Lolita Island became exposed by Anonymous and a few other folks to say, look, this guy went to a pedophile island where the founder of the island, who was the founder of the Home Shopping Network, was charged with 40 counts of child trafficking, only convicted of one, of course, and got HBO prison for whatever number of months. I'm sure he spent no time in prison whatsoever. But Bill Clinton went there over 25 times, and he left the Secret Service behind up to 5 times. So he wouldn't be recorded as to what he was doing. I don't know if this was during his presidency or after, but he was there. And Hillary Clinton went there as well. They supposedly have a video of him raping some 13-year-old girl. Well, that was going to be a problem for Hillary. So what do? They drum up the story against Trump, which then, after the election, it fizzles away. They have all these women saying that he raped them, and then they had to admit they took up to $500,000 to accuse Trump of such a thing, but it was all fake. That should tell you who the good guy is and who the bad guy is, right? What I thought was interesting is that, when you meet a billionaire who isn't a flash-in-the-pants billionaire, like a Mark Cuban or whatever, he made a flash-in-the-pants amount of money, right place, right time, cashes out. Good for him. But for someone who's built an empire over 40 years, to not be accused of murdering someone, of, having some really kind of unsavory lifestyle on the side, really like sleeping with a bunch of whores. Remember was it the mayor of Washington, D.C., got caught doing crack and sleeping with whores in a hotel, and the motherfucker got to not only have that video released of him doing that, but he got to be reelected. It was it Mayor Barry or whatever his name was? Unbelievable. Now, there's a part of us that, a group of us that think, okay, well, not everyone's perfect, and so we're not the kind of people who are going to be slinging stones. So part of us think that a little bit of humanity, like, some of the locker room talk between, Bush and Trump, we all talk about stuff, when we don't think we're being recorded, and it's the last thing we'd want anyone else to know. Almost every male on planet Earth has said something that would be utterly mortifying if it was, videotaped and broadcast through the local church on Sunday. But I think the best way to defeat the deep state is to really understand what I've kind of laid out on this particular episode, is to understand you have these rings of influence, that there's a lot of good people also that have been kind of duped into this organization. I talk about compartmentalization all the time in this episode, so I won't repeat myself, but obviously we all know the soldiers that go out and fight wars. They're our brothers, our sisters, our fathers, our mothers, all these individuals, and they're not bad people. They do not have knowledge of what they're doing. So again, we don't need to blame them specifically. The only thing we want to do is sort of maybe at the right time, probably not while they're in active duty, unless they're asking questions and having, Tillman questions. Let's not forget that guy. He left the NFL to join the military during the 2003 invasion of Afghanistan, and the guy was shot in the face by a local warlord, goon, because he was asking questions about 9/11, asking questions about Osama bin Laden and the legality of the war. He had communicated to his brother he was going to come home and become an activist against the war once he's done. And they shot him in the face when he returned. He was a problem because he was a celebrity. So we don't want to get our guys in trouble. Wait till they're in safe zones, and then they can campaign after they've done their term. Yeah, they'll have regrets, most likely, for doing what they've done. But if nothing else, that'll become their conviction. That'll become their fuel to be a truther. And, I'm talking about organizations that already exist. There's even Israeli soldiers who are caballing together to talk about how they have been duped into killing Palestinians and to false flagging Palestinian attacks so that they can go in and tear down neighborhoods. That's truth. You can go up and watch these guys. These guys are formidable as hell. They are the equivalent to our Navy SEALs, our Delta Force, and they are not to be trifled with physically. But they have changed their mind about what they have done because they still are good people down inside. And just because someone hasn't awakened yet or refuses your information doesn't mean they won't in the future. So you don't have to get all butthurt about it. You just let them hear your information. Maybe don't give it out to them as you're a bad person because you still believe what you believe, but just say, hey, there's some people that say this is the truth. Maybe something you want to look into. I don't know. It's up to you, man. See you later. Bye. Boom. We haven't been hip to the deep state tactics until the last 10 years. Most of us. Now, there's some people who've been awake for a very long time. Some of them have devoted their life to the process of telling others. The exciting part is that we're now inside of a very, very delicate era in humanity. I say the word delicate because we now are communicating for the very first time about these subject matters, and we're not being, yanked out of our houses in the middle of the night because there's just simply too many of us. We have a lot of responsibilities on our hand if we take back control of this world. a lot of responsibilities that, frankly, a lot of us don't want to have when we wake up the next day, because it will consume your life. You could be a 25-year-old political science prodigy who knows everything that I'm saying and 10 times more. And if you take on one of the agendas, say we succeed, we get rid of these deep state folks, we outlaw all the mechanisms that they use to control us, right? We succeed. And you're 25 years old after all those laws have been passed and the world is going to become a different place. Someone still has to visit India and say, you got to bring your population way the fuck down. They got to go to China and say, you got to bring your population down and keep it even between sexes so that your males have mates. You know, if two people have one kid, they brought down the population. Maybe there's a financial incentive if you choose to do so. But even if you just have two, you're maintaining the world population. That's better than increasing it. There's a lot of countries in Europe that are basically going extinct. There are religions that are plugging South America to tell them to have as many kids as possible, because if they don't, God will be unhappy with them. Those changes have to occur. We have to stop this madness. The world is not yet overpopulated by any stretch of the means, right? We all know that. But we seem to, either through deep state manipulation or through our own inabilities, we're unable to feed them all. We have a world that is in different stages, right? Your Middle East Sharia law followers, which I have no idea whether or not that's 51% or 5%. I have no idea. But anyone who worships that series of laws, which has been more propagandized than anything, it's 2,000 or 3,000 years behind where we are today in terms of how to treat males and females and homosexuals and all that kind of stuff, right? We have demonized the scientific practice of acknowledging our biological genders. You know, we have tribes in Africa which, gosh, you know, some of them look like they're, who knows, 4,000 to 6,000 years behind everyone else. Now, a lot of times they're not hurting anyone, right? So they're not really growing in much population, but there should be some efforts to bring them up to date on where we are, because we are a global population of different races and different cultures, right? They can still maintain their culture and understand how radio works, how a combustion engine works. I mean, those are some basic things. A lot of tribes don't have any wheels yet. Can you fucking believe that? It's true. They have no carts, no buggies, no nothing. If they want to drag something a long distance, they use what the Native Americans use, which are sleds. The Native Americans 750 years ago did not have the wheel. When we found them in 1492, they didn't have wheels. We got to do something about helping out the neural nets of our fellow man. We do. So there's a lot to get done once the deep state is eradicated, but becoming educated about their existence and their methods of manipulation. Look at how money's made in the world. Look at how it's valued through a petrodollar system. That's a good start. Figure out how the education is completely co-opted by these publishing companies. That's another good start. Find out how your health is completely compromised and marginalized. You're told to eat toxic food and give birth to babies on your back inside hospitals. Otherwise, you're going to die. Lies, lies, lies. Cancer is a man-made disease. Remember that. Pharmaceutical companies don't create any cures. Remember that. Organizations that dedicate themselves to war, only war. That's all they do. So if you fill up a military organization with a bunch of Tomahawk missiles and stealth bombers and stealth fighters and Trident submarines and all this other stuff, what do you think they're going to do with it? Deep down inside, they want war. They do. They do not desire peace. Sure, they may always try to look for the area of which is, evil and try to exert their power on evil. But in the end, it's going to be war no matter what. This is the sick, sick pool of soup that we have allowed to be concocted around us and fed to us to determine who we are as human beings on this planet. The deep state is instilled a psychosis on man paranoia, of hatred, of haves and have-nots. Ironically, the police helicopter flies over me about this time, right? You know, there's always, to any problem in the world, there's two sides of how you solve the problem. You either try to address the symptom, or you go for the systemic cause, right? So in America right now, especially through the peaceful, was it Nobel Peace Prize winning President Obama, he absolutely militarized the law enforcement of this world. We have to demilitarize our police, and we have to fix society. We have to cut off this umbilical cord of programming from the deep state to our people. And what I find interesting is, and I know this episode keeps going on and on, but I just keep thinking of examples that I think we're all probably dealing with on some level. It's interesting when I meet individuals because they obviously have probably 3 states of wealth, one of 3. They're either okay, and they've kind of got what they need, and they understand that they have what they need, and they don't make any complaints about it. Then you have the ultra rich that can't seem to get enough. They have more money than they'll ever need for their entire life, but god damn it if they won't bitch and moan about a tip at a fast food restaurant. But then you have your poor. And there's obviously different levels of being poor. But what's interesting about it is the folks that have been conditioned to want this get-rich-fast scheme, and who talk more about being rich than anyone else on planet Earth, is your poor people. And the sad truth is that most people I meet who are poor because they've been strung out on pop culture. Everything that they thought was going to be the solution to life ended up being a lie. Big fucking surprise, right? But when you talk to them about how they're going to get out of this situation, they have the get-rich-fast scheme solution. Looking for that one deal to make all this money, as if anyone ever gets that deal. They won't go study and read a book and learn a trade skill because I don't have to, man. There's this one thing, my buddy, and they got this one case that they keep quoting all the time. Almost like an alcoholic who has the crutch of why they drink. This person has a crutch of why they don't have to fucking get their shit together. There's no get-rich-fast scheme, people. Not that you should pay attention to. Everything is working really, really hard. And right now in the world, there's this sort of race war that they keep trying to bait. Your George Soros, your Hillary Clintons of the world are trying to exacerbate, all these organizations, from the Mexicans that want to take back America. Supposedly they completely control this area. There were no Native Americans ever. And your sort of Black Lives Matters folks, and of course there's a million others. And you are the white privileged if you're white, right? We get all this fucking accolades. It's just because we're white. I've been white, blonde hair, blue eye my entire life, and I can tell you I have never walked into an organization and just simply showed my genetics and got a job, got a loan from a bank. I can say the only loans I've ever had from a bank were to buy cars. That's it. I went in once as a young man with a really good business plan and was completely turned down. And I had a pretty good job, but I didn't have the collateral. Right? The bank's not going to take any fucking risk with me because that's the way banks work. There's no privilege. All you have to create the argument of privilege is to have an argument for a have and a have not. And that's completely subjective, right? If I have something that you want, all you have to do is say that you want it, and then I'm a dick for having it. And you got a rationale in your mind, right? Remember how little kids used to play with toys when you're kids? In your neighborhood, if you grew up where I grew up, there was no kid that was different than another kid, right? Everyone had good families. Everyone had, relatively speaking, we all had the same level of toys. And it didn't fucking matter how privileged all these kids were. There was still some asshole kid who had all the toys. You had the big wheel and every fucking thing that you'd ever want at home. And you had one toy. That was it. You had one. But he wanted your toy because his family didn't buy him that specific toy. And when you look at children, you're like, well, of course, they're children. That's what they do. They're stupid. They're selfish until they learn how to share. And that's what we have to teach children, is how to share, right? Okay, great. Problem. You can run that formula until somebody dies of old age. Why does racism exist in the Midwest? Well, a lot of times it's because a bunch of folks hate themselves, and so they just try to scapegoat other races as to why they have a problem. I've literally watched within my own family grown men who were the most Neapolitan, loved all races, loved all cultures, get older, find it difficult to maintain jobs. They got fat because they ate too much goddamn food, and they became just unbelievable racists because when they looked in the mirror, they didn't like it. And of course, it couldn't be their fucking fault. It had to be someone else's fault. And the weird thing about racism is that they will point to people they don't know, that don't work in their circle of life, and blame them as if they have any ecosystem that they share with this other person. It's insane. I think you feel me. This is sort of preaching to the choir, but what I want to do is compare notes with you guys and simply give you some of the thought processes I have in case you find yourself in these discussions and you want to have a little bit of sort of coup de grace. You want to have those smoking gun statements so you can say, yeah, I hear you. That's a cliche. Let me give you what I think is really happening. Boom, boom, boom. And you'll find people switch on a dime. It's unbelievable. Anyhow, I think that's it. DeepThoughtsRadio.com for all the feeds. Remember, we do have a Facebook group that's closed, so feel free to join that. Again, you have to have a profile that has some life to it. Otherwise, I won't let you in. We have video if you're on audio if you're on video. It's YouTube and vid.me for the video. Again, as I keep saying over and over again, if you want to watch Season 1 unimpeded, please go to vid.me and watch it there. It's Deep Thoughts Radio, not just Deep Thoughts. Remember, too, it's a variety show, so this is going to go in and out of cerebral episodes and very technical episodes that are fun. So this year I'm going to try to keep a good heartbeat of some of the more fun, sort of coast-to-coast AM subjects, but we're going to go into them, obviously, a hell of a lot deeper and call bullshit, which George Norrie never does. So hopefully that'll be entertaining. Regardless, take care of yourself and someone else, and I'll see you in the next Deep Thoughts. Over now.